What is power, really? It can build empires that touch the clouds and command the loyalty of thousands. It can bend the world to one person's will. But what it can't do is buy a man's soul or erase the sins of the father. In the glittering world of unbelievable wealth, some truths are buried so deep you'd think they were gone forever. But they aren't. They wait. And when they finally surface, they don't just crack the foundation of a dynasty, they shatter it. This is the story of a man who had everything he could ever want, except for the one thing he desperately needed. It's a story of rejection, ruin, and a shot at redemption that came at the highest possible price. The ballroom was a galaxy of diamonds and fake smiles. At the center of it all stood Julius Lancaster, a man whose net worth was talked about like the GDP of a small country. His voice, which usually moved markets and ended careers, sliced through the chatter of the party. But he wasn't making a toast, he was passing a sentence. Standing before him was his son, Michael, a young man whose only crime was the color of his skin. Julius's eyes, as cold as a vault door, showed zero fatherly affection. "You are a stain on this family's legacy," he announced, every word a small, sharp piece of cruelty. "A walking scandal I won't tolerate anymore. From this day on, you are no son of mine. You'll have nothing. You are nothing." He gave a sharp, dismissive wave to his security guards, who moved in without a second thought. The billionaire didn't just disown his son, he publicly erased him, throwing him out of the gilded cage as if he were a piece of trash. As Michael was let out, a deep silence fell over the room. It was the sound of an empire beginning to rot from the inside. Julius Lancaster didn't just build his empire, he forged it with an iron will. From his sprawling Malibu estate, a fortress of glass and white marble overlooking the Pacific, he commanded Lancaster Industries. His world was a perfectly curated collection of assets, luxury hotels, tech firms that shaped the future, and fashion lines for the global elite. He was a king in a bespoke suit, and his kingdom was built on one simple rule. Value was measured in dollars, and loyalty was something you could buy. Anything that couldn't be counted, anything that didn't feed the relentless engine of profit, was a liability. And in his cold, calculating mind, his son, Michael, was the biggest liability of them all. Michael was the result of a brief affair Julius had buried long ago, a secret he thought was sealed with a fat check and an NDA. But secrets don't stay buried, and Michael had grown into a young man who was a living, breathing reminder of a past Julius refused to own. The boy's mother had passed away when he was a teen, leaving him in the care of a sterile trust set up by Julius's lawyers to keep him at a distance. But Michael wasn't happy being a footnote in his father's ledger. He was smart, driven, and had a quiet integrity that seemed to make a mockery of his father's hollow world. But worst of all, in Julius's prejudiced eyes, Michael was black. For a man obsessed with image and the pristine brand of the Lancaster name, Michael's very existence was a blemish. He didn't see a son, he saw a PR problem that undermined the pure, powerful lineage he was so proud of. He surrounded himself with people who saw the world his way, sycophantic executives, fake friends, and his new wife, Amelia, who was just as obsessed with social standing as he was with money. Amelia especially despised Michael, seeing him as a threat to the inheritance she wanted for her own future children. She whispered poison in Julius's ear, feeding his worst instincts about how Michael's presence was bad for the family's image. The night of the party wasn't a random outburst, it was a calculated business decision. Julius had decided to cut his losses. After being humiliated in front of everyone, Michael found himself completely alone. The trust was gone. His access to his old life was cut off. The few people he'd thought were his friends, all children of his father's business partners, now looked right through him. He was an outcast. For weeks, Michael was just adrift. The rejection was a physical weight in his chest. He could still hear his father's voice in his head, "You are nothing." He could have let those words break him. He could have given in to the anger and bitterness. A lot of people would have. But Michael was made of stronger stuff. He had his father's intelligence, but he also had his mother's resilience. He saw his father's empire not as a paradise he'd been kicked out of, but a hollow, flawed machine.
and he decided then and there that he wouldn't be broken. He would build something himself. He found a tiny, run-down apartment a world away from Malibu. He took whatever odd jobs he could find, humbling work that was nothing like his old life. But he was watching, he was learning, and he spotted a crack in his father's unbreakable fortress. Lancaster Industries owned dozens of smaller companies, and one of them was a small, forgotten logistics company that was losing money year after year. It was so insignificant it was basically a rounding error on the corporate books. Using the little money he'd saved, he got a job there as an entry-level analyst. He started at the absolute bottom of the company with his family's name on it, a ghost in the machine. To his father, he was invisible, just another nameless employee in a failing division. And that was exactly how he wanted it. While Julius Lancaster sat on his golden throne thinking he'd cut the weakness out of his life, the son he'd thrown away was quietly getting ready. Not for revenge, but for reclamation. He wasn't there to destroy his father's legacy. He was learning how to save it.
For a while, Julius Lancaster's world kept spinning just fine. He'd cut off the part of his life he found unworthy, and the corporation, like a shark, just kept moving. He closed a multi-billion-dollar merger, and his face was on the cover of business magazines. He and Amelia threw parties where the world's elite came to kiss the ring. Julius felt invincible. He had built a fortress around himself, not just of wealth, but of pure denial. He never said Michael's name again. In his mind, the boy was gone. But empires built on shaky ground always crack. The first sign of trouble was a new, aggressive competitor called Apex Global. Led by a ruthless young CEO, they started stealing tiny bits of Lancaster Industries' market share. At first, Julius wrote them off. He'd crushed dozens of upstarts. But Apex was different. They were fast, they were smart, and they somehow seemed to know Lancaster's every move. A huge deal for a hotel chain in Asia, a deal Julius thought was a sure thing, was snatched by Apex at the last second. The loss wasn't just about money, it was a public slap in the face. Then, things got worse. Whispers of corporate sabotage started to spread. An internal audit, meant to find someone to blame for the lost Asia deal, found something much bigger: systemic fraud. Key executives, men Julius had trusted for decades, men who had laughed at his jokes and clapped at his speeches, had been embezzling millions. They'd been selling company secrets, and the buyer, it turned out, was Apex Global. The betrayal was staggering. The men he saw as his loyal soldiers were just parasites, getting rich off his life's work. The scandal exploded. Lancaster Industries' stock, once a symbol of stability, started to tank. Investors got scared. The media, which used to adore him, now circled like vultures, their headlines screaming about corruption. In a rage, Julius fired half his executive board. He became paranoid and trusted no one. He locked himself away in his Malibu fortress, where the ocean views now felt like prison walls. His wife, Amelia, who loved the glow of his power, now found herself married to a man eaten alive by anger and fear. Her reassurances felt empty, tainted by the frantic look of a woman watching her inheritance disappear. While Julius's kingdom was on fire, a quiet revolution was happening in a forgotten corner of his empire. At the logistics subsidiary, Michael wasn't just an analyst anymore. He'd been promoted to junior manager, then head of operations. He saw the rot in the main company not as a threat, but as an opportunity. The old way of doing things, the bloated bureaucracy and resistance to change, was exactly why Lancaster Industries was so vulnerable. Michael started putting his innovative ideas to work. He developed a new software that streamlined their supply chains, cutting costs by a massive 30%. He built a small, fiercely loyal team of young, ambitious employees who were inspired by his vision. They didn't see him as the disowned son of a billionaire. They saw him as a brilliant leader who treated them with respect, the total opposite of the fear-based culture at the main company. The results were impossible to ignore. While the rest of Lancaster Industries was bleeding money, Michael's small division became profitable, then wildly profitable. It was the only bright spot in a quarterly report drenched in red ink. At first, the board, in their panic, barely noticed, but as the crisis got worse and as Apex Global launched a hostile takeover bid, their desperate search for a lifeline led them to the one part of the company that was actually working.
They were floored by what they found. The turnaround wasn't a fluke. It was the result of visionary leadership, and when they dug into who was responsible, they found a name that sent a shockwave through the boardroom: Michael, the son Julius had thrown away. At the same time, the crushing stress finally broke Julius. The larger-than-life man suffered a massive stroke. He woke up in a sterile hospital room, the beeping of machines the only sound. His power was gone. He couldn't move the left side of his body. His voice, which once boomed across boardrooms, was now a slurred, garbled whisper. He was helpless. And he was alone. His executives were too busy trying to save their own skins to visit. His so-called friends had vanished. Even Amelia's visits grew shorter, her patience thin. She looked at him not with love, but with the cold eyes of someone assessing a damaged asset. Lying in that bed, stripped of everything, Julius Lancaster had to face the truth. His empire was crumbling, and the only person who had ever shown him real, unbought loyalty was the son he tried to erase. In the depths of his despair, a desperate, unthinkable idea began to form. He had to find Michael. The man had built his world on pride, but now, broken and alone, he was about to do the one thing he swore he'd never do: ask for help from the son he destroyed. What happens when a father's last hope is the child he threw away? If you believe in the power of second chances, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It really helps us bring more stories like this to you. Now, let's see what happens when these two worlds collide.
The hospital room was suffocatingly quiet. Julius was propped up against a mountain of pillows, a ghost of the man he used to be. The left side of his face drooped, and his eyes were wide with a terrifying mix of desperation and shame. He'd spent 2 days trying to make his clumsy tongue form the right words, practicing with a nurse who listened with detached pity. Now, the moment was here. Michael stood in the doorway. He hadn't come because his father called. He'd been cornered by a few desperate members of the board. They'd shown him the numbers, the path to bankruptcy, the all but certain victory of Apex Global. They told him he was their only hope. They believed the strategies that had turned his little subsidiary into a powerhouse could save the entire company. It was an insane request. They were asking him to save the legacy of the man who'd called him a stain. He had come to the hospital to give his answer in front of the man who'd caused him so much pain. He walked into the room. For a long moment, there was just silence. Michael saw not a titan of industry, but a frail, broken old man. Julius saw not the boy he'd cast out, but a powerful man who held the fate of his entire world in his hands. Finally, Julius spoke, his voice a thick, labored slur. "They told me you—" He struggled, frustration welling in his eyes. "They told you I'm the only one who can fix this. The company you built, the legacy you were so desperate to protect from me." A tear rolled down Julius's cheek. The sight was so pathetic, Michael almost felt a flicker of pity, but he snuffed it out. Pity was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Please," Julius whispered. The word was a raw, ragged sound, the death rattle of a lifetime of pride. Michael's jaw clenched. "Why should I?" he asked, the question sharp as glass. "Why should I lift a finger to save the empire of a man who threw me away like garbage? You didn't want me. You said I was a stain. You said I was nothing." Julius closed his eyes as more tears flowed. He tried to speak again, but only choked sobs came out. In that moment, all the arrogance and cruelty was gone, leaving only a terrified, dying man who had lost everything. He'd spent his life building an empire of gold, only to realize in his final days that it was a cold and empty kingdom. Michael watched him, his own heart a war zone of emotions. The anger was there, hot and righteous, but underneath it, something else. He thought of the thousands of employees who'd lose their jobs if the company failed. He thought about the Lancaster name and the small part of him that, despite it all, still felt a connection to it. He realized he wasn't thinking about doing this for the man crying in the bed. He was thinking about everyone else. He had a choice.
He could walk away and watch his father's world burn, which many would say was justice, or he could step in, not as a son looking for approval, but as a leader. "I'll do it," Michael said, his voice now ringing with authority. "I'll do it because it's the right thing to do, for the employees, and to prove that a person's value has nothing to do with your prejudice. And when I'm done, this company will be mine, not through inheritance, but because I earned it. You will sign over controlling interest to me, everything." It was the ultimate irony. The son who was told he would have nothing would now have it all. Julius, broken and defeated, gave a slow, jerky nod. It was his final, unconditional surrender. The days that followed were a blur. Armed with the authority of CEO, Michael descended on Lancaster Industries like a force of nature. He wasn't a ghost in the machine anymore. He was its master. He fired the remaining yes-men and promoted the hungry young talent from his own division. He dismantled the toxic culture of fear and replaced it with one of innovation. He didn't just fend off the hostile takeover from Apex Global, he turned the tables, brilliantly acquiring a key piece of their technology that had been built on Lancaster's stolen data, crippling his rival. The media went into a frenzy, with headlines like, "Rejected Son Saves Empire in a Shocking Takeover." They called him a visionary who had emerged from the shadows to reclaim his birthright. Months later, with the company stable and growing, Michael went back to the hospital. Julius was weaker now, hovering in the twilight between life and death. The room was empty. Amelia had taken a hefty settlement and vanished. Michael sat by the bed. Julius's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment they were clear. He looked at his son, the man who hadn't just saved his empire, but had made it better and more just than he ever could have. "You are my son," Julius whispered, his voice a faint rustle. A single, final tear rolled down his cheek. He reached out with a trembling hand, and Michael, after a second's hesitation, took it. It was the first time they had touched in over a decade. In that touch, a lifetime of pain and anger just dissolved. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was something more complicated, an acceptance, a quiet understanding. Julius Lancaster died that night, holding his son's hand. He left behind a legacy not of gold, but of a profound and unexpected truth. Conclusion. 5 years later, Lancaster Industries was more successful than ever before. It was a global leader, known not just for luxury, but for ethical and innovative business. Michael Lancaster was hailed as one of the most brilliant CEOs of his generation. He never moved into the Malibu estate, choosing to live a quiet life, far from the empty glamour his father had loved so much. The empire built on prejudice was rebuilt by the son who was rejected, on a new foundation of integrity and inclusion. Julius spent his life building a fortress to protect his assets, only to learn in his final moments that the only legacy that truly mattered was the son he had cast away. He learned far too late that a person's worth isn't defined by bloodlines or skin color, but by their character. And in the end, it was that character, the very thing he tried to crush, that became his salvation. The greatest victories are often born from the deepest wounds. Thanks for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories that explore the truths that connect us all. Let us know in the comments what you thought about Michael's final decision. Until next time, remember that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you get back up.